Very nice to be here this evening. I wish you'd do something about the rain. It's getting on my nerves a little bit. My wife and I just got back from Hawaii. Isn't that a sadistic thing to say? It rains in Hawaii, but very lightly. It just caresses your face lightly as you're walking along in the sunlight. Merciful God. A bicentennial program. I think that I would like to read a poem about a political figure who means something to me. Two political figures, actually, who mean something to me. There will be two poems. The first of these is a Chinese. He was a governor during the Tang Dynasty. That is when he was alive and writing. It was sort of early in what we would call the 9th century A.D. Like many other writers in his time, he also held public office. His name was Bo Chui. He is an interesting man to me because he did take some part in the public life of his time. He had few illusions about it. He considered himself to be a failure and a loser, in a public sense anyway. And he was able to see how he was sort of a loser in his private life too. And sometimes he could see the humor of this. He had held some kind of public office in the capital city of Chang'an, and at one time the government rapidly changed hands, that his influence changed. He was told by one of his spies that one evening he was told that he had a choice. He could either hurry to a certain little town where the river was flowing and catch a boat there north up into the mountains, and there take over the post as a governor of a province, or he could stay in Chang'an and have his throat cut. He thought that over and decided that he would try to catch the boat. And there were people after him. When he got to the boat, though, the wind was blowing in the wrong direction. He was on time. The boat was all ready. But somehow the wind wouldn't go along with his plans. He wrote a little poem about that goes, white billows and huge waves block the river crossing. Wherever I go, danger and difficulty. Whatever I do, failure. Just as in my worldly career, I wander and lose the road. So when I come to the river crossing, I am blocked by contrary winds. Of fishes and prawns sodden in the rain, the smell fills my nostrils with the sting of insects that come with the fog. My whole body is sore. I am growing old. Time flies past, and my short span of life runs out while I sit in a boat at Chuko, wasting 10 days. That's really the old joke, about, and you're going to make trouble for me. Troubles pile up. My poem about him is called As I step over a puddle at the end of winter, I think of an ancient Chinese governor. The epigraph is from another poem of Bochui. He had been, when he was trying to get to the place in the mountains, he did eventually get there, but he was on a rope bridge swinging between two cliffs far below were sharp rocks. He got halfway across and he thought, and he wrote later, and how can I, born in evil days and fresh from failure, ask a kindness of fate? Bochui, balding old politician, what's the use? I think of you uneasily entering the gorges of the Yangtze when you were being towed up the rapids toward some political job or other in the city of Chungshou. You made it, I guess, by dark. But it is 1960. It is almost spring again, and the tall rocks of Minneapolis build me my own black twilight of bamboo ropes and waters. Where is Yuan Chen, the friend you loved? Where is the sea that once solved the whole loneliness of the Midwest? Where is Minneapolis? I can see nothing but the great terrible oak tree darkening with winter. Did you find the city of isolated men beyond the mountains? Or have you been holding the end of a frayed rope for 1,000 years? My other little political poem, well, that's sort of a political poem. It's about a person who for a time was a public figure, and he got out of it. I have one about, or rather two poems, about President Harding. I've been thinking about President Harding in recent days again. He didn't come to a good end, I suppose. When I think of what's going on during our presidential election year, and when I think over so many of the people in this century, human beings like the rest of us, who have had some kind of power in their hands and wondered, at least for a moment, what to do with it, I don't think Harding comes out so bad. Two poems about President Harding. One, his death. In Merrion, the honey locust trees are falling. Everybody in town remembers the white hair, the campaign of a lost summer, the front porch open to the public, and the vaguely stunned smile of a lucky man. Neighbor, I want to be helpful, he said once. Later, you think I'm honest, don't you? Weeping drunk. I am drunk this evening in 1961 in a jag for my countrymen who died of crab meat on the way back from Alaska. Everyone knows that joke. How many honey locusts have fallen, pitched root-long into the open graves of strip mines since the First World War ended, and Wilson, the gaunt deacon, jogged sullenly into silence. Tonight, the cancerous ghosts of old con men shed their leaves. For a proud man lost between the turnpike near Cleveland and the chiropractor signs looming among dead mulberry trees, There is no place left to go but home. Warren lacks mentality, one of his friends said, yet he was beautiful. He was the snowfall turned to white stallions standing still under dark elm trees. He died in public. He claimed the secret right to be ashamed. Two, his tomb in Ohio. The epigraph to the second poem is from the sort of obituary notice that H.L. Mencken wrote about his enemy, William Jennings Bryan. Bryan died suddenly, and he had just eaten a heavy meal and had some kind of attack and died. And the word got around that Bryan, who had once been a very highly respected political figure, and then got mixed up in born-again Christianity and whatnot, and was sort of humiliated by Clarence Darrow at that monkey trial, the Scopes trial in Dayton, Tennessee. Somebody wrote that Bryan had died of a broken heart, and Mencken said he didn't die of a broken heart, he died of a busted gut. Well, he died of a busted gut, said Mencken. When I say north of us, I'm from Ohio, from southern Ohio, and thinking of it geographically that way. 100 slag piles north of us, at the mercy of the moon and rain, he lies in his ridiculous tomb, our fellow citizen. No, I have never seen that place where many shadows of faceless thieves chuckle and stumble and embrace on beer cans, stogie butts, and graves. One holiday, one rainy week, after the country fell apart, Hoover and Coolidge came to speak and snivel about his broken heart. His grave, a huge absurdity, embarrassed cops and visitors. Hoover and Coolidge crept away by night, and women closed their doors. Now junkmen call their children in before they catch their death of cold. Young lovers let the moon begin its quick spring, and the day grows old. The mean one-legger who rakes up leaves has chased the loafers out of the park. Minnigan Leonard half believes in God, and the pool room goes dark. America goes on, laughing, and Harding was a fool. Even his big pretentious stone lays him bare to ridicule. I know it, but don't look at me. By God, I didn't start this mess. Whatever moon and rain may be, the hearts of men are merciless. I think I'll follow Ohio for a moment, because after all, there are all sorts of interesting things in Ohio and interesting people. We had from Ohio something remarkable. Five presidents, I believe, came from Ohio. And when you consider that there are some other states that have produced some interesting, sometimes even distinguished political figures, like Minnesota, for example. Minnesota's never had a president. But in Ohio, we produced 5. Harding, Rutherford B. Hayes, James A. Garfield, William Howard Taft, God, it sounds like that passage in Paradise Lost, doesn't it? You know, fens, caves, bogs, dens, and shades of death, you know. Well, we're a mixture there of the North and the South, and the East and the West, and all those things sort of crisscross. I knew an old man when I was a boy. My hometown is called Martins Ferry, Ohio, and it's still, I understand, a comparatively small place. I knew an old man when I was a boy, and his name was Francis Leonard. Francis Leonard was known to everyone as Minigan. I don't know why. He was one of those old people who seemed to get smaller all the time. Some old people seem to shrink. Another thing about him is that he had drunk a good deal of booze in his life, and it seemed to just eat away his brain or something. And it was one of those strange cases where everyone wanted to sort of take care of him. And sometimes he would get caught in a sort of daze, stand staring at something for hours. And if you went up to him and asked him if he was all right, the only thing anyone ever heard him say was, "God bless my soul." Well, okay, he's a town drunk, but I've heard people say other things worse than that. One evening, some friends and I found him standing. It was starting to snow, and we thought we'd better take him home. We did. I was about 12 years old. And we took Minigan home. We took him to a place where he and his brother Jimmy lived. What actually happened was that Jimmy was there. We were a little afraid of him, but we took Minigan there, and everything was all right. He didn't stand out by the river and get pneumonia or whatever. When I tried to think about this years afterward, I tried to write it from the point of view of the 12-year-old kid I was and change things around a little bit. But, well, the poem is called A Note Left in Jimmy Leonard's Shack. Near the dry river's watermark, we found your brother, Minigan, flopped like a fish against the muddy ground. Beanie, the kid whose yellow hair turns green, told me to find you, even in the rain, and tell you he was drowned. I hid behind the chassis on the bank, the wreck of someone's Ford. No. I was afraid to come and wake you drunk. You told me once the waking up was hard, the daylight beating at you like a board. Blood in my stomach sank. Besides, you told him never to go out along the riverside, drinking and singing, clattering about. You might have thrown a rock at me and cried, I was to blame. I let him fall in the road and pitch down on his side. Well, I'll get hell enough when I get home for coming up this far, leaving the note and running as I came. I'll go and tell my father where you are. You better go find Minigan before policemen here and come. Beanie went home and I got sick and ran. You old son of a bitch, you better hurry down to Minigan. He's drunk or dying now, I don't know which. Rolled in the roots and garbage like a fish, the poor old man. The next poem is also about Ohio. This is the autumn. I'm thinking about the autumn. Ohio State has another interesting football team this year, and they have the most interesting coach there. Why doesn't somebody put Woody Hayes up for president? I think he could make it. Christ have mercy. This poem is called Autumn Begins in Martins Ferry, Ohio. and you might kind of call it a kind of football fight song. I don't think I'm very welcome back in that town, not really. Autumn begins in Martins Ferry, Ohio. They're very proud of their football teams there. In the Shreve High football stadium, I think of Polacks nursing long beers in Tiltonsville and the gray faces of Negroes in the blast furnace at Benwood and the ruptured night watchman of Wheeling Steel dreaming of heroes. All the proud fathers are ashamed to go home. Their women cluck like starved pullets dying for love. Therefore, their sons grow suicidally beautiful at the beginning of October and gallop terribly against each other's bodies. I would like to read a translation. I'm not sure about how well the translation comes out, but it's a poem that I like very much. It's from the Spanish of Pedro Salinas. Salinas, I believe, addressed almost all of the poems that he ever wrote to his wife. All of his poems are love poems. He's terribly important to me, and I tried to make a version of one of his poems. It's called Not in Marble Palaces. Not in marble palaces, not in months, no, nor in ciphers, never touching ground. In weightless, fragile worlds, we have lived together. Time was beaten out, but hardly by minutes. 1 minute was 100 years, one life, one love. Roofs sheltered us, less than roofs, clouds, less than clouds, heavens, even less, air, nothing. Crossing oceans formed out of 20 tears, 10 yours and 10 mine, we arrived at the golden beads of a necklace, clear islands deserted, without flowers, without bodies. A harbor so tiny, made of glass, for a love that in itself was enough for the largest longing. And we asked neither ships nor time for help. Opening enormous tunnels in grains of sand, we discovered the mines of flames and of chance, and everything hanging from that thread that held up what? That's why our life doesn't appear to be lived. Slippery, evasive, it left behind neither wakes nor footprints. If you want to remember it, don't look where you always look for traces and recollections. Don't look at your soul, your shadow, or your lips. Look carefully into the palm of your hand. It's empty. The next poem is called Stages on a Journey Westward. I've lived so many different places, and At one time, I lived up in the Pacific Northwest, in Seattle, in fact, for about 4 years. Seattle, you know, the town where Jimmy Carter recently tried to explain to the VFW that words can have different meanings. That's it, I think. I was thinking about the movement that people have made across America towards some kind of frontier, and realized that I had lived in many places too, and I put them all together into a poem, stopping at different places. Stages on a journey westward. 1. I began in Ohio. I still dream of home. Near Mansfield, enormous Dobbins enter dark barns in autumn, where they can be lazy, where they can munch little apples or sleep long. But by night now, in the bread lines my father prowls, I cannot find him, so far off, 1,500 miles or so away, and yet I can hardly sleep. In a blue rag, the old man limps to my bed, leading a blind horse of gentleness. In 1932, grimy with machinery, he sang me a lullaby of a goose girl. Outside the house, the slag heaps waited. 2. In western Minnesota, just now, I slept again. In my dream, I crouched over a fire. The only human beings between me and the Pacific Ocean were old Indians who wanted to kill me. They squat and stare for hours into small fires far off in the mountains. The blades of their hatchets are dirty with the grease of huge, silent buffaloes. 3. It is dawn. I am shivering, even beneath a huge eiderdown. I came in last night, drunk, and left the oil stove cold. I listen a long time now to the flurries. Snow howls all around me out of the abandoned prairies. It sounds like the voices of bums and gamblers rattling through the bare 19th century whorehouses in Nevada. 4. Defeated for re-election, the half-educated sheriff of Mukilteo, Washington, has been drinking again. He leads me up the cliff, tottering. Both drunk, we stand among the graves. Miners paused here on the way up to Alaska. Angry, they spaded their broken women's bodies into ditches of crabgrass. I lie down between tombstones. At the bottom of the cliff, America is over and done with. America plunged into the dark furrows of the sea again. Those poems seem to be drifting a little toward morbidity of some kind. And I think that I should change the tone a little bit and read some poems I suppose you could call nature poems. It's as good a term as any. Actually, they're just descriptions. Here's a little poem which is just a description, and for a reason that really has nothing to do with the poem itself, that is, has nothing to do with anything that goes on in the poem, I have a certain fondness for it because it reminds me of something that happened. There's a description in this poem of some cows. I'll try to explain what I mean by the thing that happened after I read the poem. The poem has the title, "From a Bus Window in Central Ohio, Just Before a Thunder Shower." Cribs loaded with roughage, huddled together before the north clouds. The wind tiptoes between poplars. The silver maple leaves squint toward the ground. An old farmer, his scarlet face apologetic with whiskey, swings back a barn door and calls 100 black and white Holsteins from the clover field. That would seem inoffensive enough. It's not going to make Sophocles move over or anything like that. But there's a critic who was really outraged by that. He was just stopping there on the bus. How did he have time to count 100 cows? Robert Bly and I read that. We actually were going to put the answer on a postcard, send it to him. We never did. We were going to write, "Dear Mr. So-and-so, I counted the tits and divided by 4. This poem is called "To the Evening Star," Central Minnesota. Under the water tower at the edge of town, a huge Airedale ponders a long ripple in the grass fields beyond. Miles off, a whole grove silently flies up into the darkness. One light comes on in the sky, one lamp on the prairie. Beautiful daylight of the body, your hands carry seashells. West of this wide plain, animals wilder than ours come down from the green mountains in the darkness. Now they can see you. They know the open meadows are safe. Now, the next poem is another description. It's called "A Blessing." Just off the highway to Rochester, Minnesota, twilight bounds softly forth on the grass, and the eyes of those 2 Indian ponies darken with kindness. They have come gladly out of the willows to welcome my friend and me. We step over the barbed wire into the pasture where they have been grazing all day alone. They ripple tensely. They can hardly contain their happiness that we have come. They bow shyly as wet swans. They love each other. There is no loneliness like theirs. At home once more, they begin munching the young tufts of spring in the darkness. I would like to hold the slenderer one in my arms, for she has walked over to me and nuzzled my left hand. She is black and white. Her mane falls wild on her forehead, and the light breeze moves me to caress her long ear that is delicate as the skin over a girl's wrist Suddenly I realize that if I stepped out of my body, I would break into blossom. I had mentioned there in that previous poem the huge Airedale. That huge Airedale was a dog, again, Robert Bly's dog. His name was Simon. There was an Airedale in the background somewhere. He wasn't a thoroughbred. He was almost as big as a Great Dane, and that's fair enough to me. Only I could never, I couldn't help thinking about things like this. I couldn't wonder, a Great Dane and an Airedale, there's something very beautiful about they seem so different in size. Somewhere in the past, shadowy figures. And there was Simon. Simon was a very nice dog. He was big, and he and I used to sit on the floor, and we tried to sing Christmas carols together once, and he would try to sing. Well, he was evidently good friends with the horse who lived out there. The horse's name was David, and David himself was a horse with a good deal of personality. He was a palomino, you know, just like the old cowboys sometimes in the really old westerns, the real ones, used to ride. It would always be a palomino or pinto, something really glorious. The trouble is that David was very old too. He was a palomino, but he was sort of swayback. He would stand at the edge of that pasture, look out over the cornfields and the prairie beyond, and behind, or right beside him, Simon would be sitting. And they would stand there with each other. Or I mean, Simon sitting, David standing. For a long time, there was something they shared there. It was very nice. I was working in my friend's converted chicken house once, and I wrote something that wasn't exactly finished, but I got it all copied out, and I felt kind of excited about it. I ran over to the house, to the farmhouse. I wanted to show it to one of my friends, but there was nobody around. It turned out that my friend's wife was way around the back of the house, hanging up laundry or whatever. I couldn't find her, and I put my briefcase down there and the poem right on it, and went around the house to look for her. When I got back, the poem was gone, and I looked over, and there stood David. David ate that poem. When I came to put my collected poems together, I thought about David with old fondness, and so I put in a page called "In Memory of the Horse David, who ate one of my poems." Here's the page. A poem called "Northern Pike," which is, of course, a fish, a big fish, and it's delicious. I've said this in public before, and I may as well admit it once again, realizing that one of these days the word is going to somehow get around, and that one of the game wardens in western Minnesota will hear about this. And Robert Bly and Jack McGuire and I will take 5 years. They do not care for people who cheat on the game laws out there. We actually did it, though. We went out in the deep middle of the night, the headwaters of the Minnesota River, and seined it. They put a net all the way across the stream right there, and then went back home. Robert went out just before daybreak and brought back the net, and the net was full of big things. It was full of carp, and there was a northern pike in it. That pike was marvelous. Fed a whole family. There also, honest to God, was an immense hole in the net. There was something got through that thing. Northern pike. All right, try this then. Everybody I know and care for, and everybody else is going to die in a loneliness I can't imagine, and a pain I don't know. We had to go on living. We untangled the net. We slit the body of this fish open from the hinge of the tail to a place beneath the chin I wish I could sing of. I would just as soon we let the living go on living. An old poet whom we believe in said the same thing, and so we paused among the dark cattails and prayed for the muskrats, for the ripples below their tails, for the little movements that we knew the crawdads were making underwater, for the right-hand wrist of my cousin, who is a policeman. We prayed for the game warden's blindness. We prayed for the road home. We ate the fish. There must be something very beautiful in my body. I am so happy. There is one poem in the book, Two Citizens, that Sandy Zuloff asked me to read. It's called The Old WPA Swimming Pool in Martins Ferry, Ohio. Everybody used to swim back in the old days down in the Ohio River. There used to be a bathing beach down there for the elegant people in the town. My contemporaries and colleagues and I swam a little down the river at another beach, and we continued to swim down there even after a regular swimming pool was built up in the town by the old WPA. We continued to swim at the other beach, not only because we were conservative, as boys tend to be, but because we felt that it was a much more elegant place. It's called the Bare Ass Beach. I swim naked there. The old WPA swimming pool in Martins Ferry, Ohio. I am almost afraid to write down this thing. I must have been, say, 7 years old. That afternoon, the families of the WPA had come out to have a good time celebrating a long gouge in the ground that the fierce husbands had filled with concrete. We knew even then the Ohio River was dying. Most of the good men who lived along that shore wanted to be in love and give good love to beautiful women who weren't pretty, and to small children like me who wondered, what the hell is this? When people don't have quite enough to eat in August and the river that is supposed to be some holiness starts dying, they swim in the earth. Uncle Sherman, Uncle Willie, Uncle Emerson, and my father helped dig that hole in the ground. I had seen by that time 2 or 3 holes in the ground, and you know what they were. But this one was not the usual cheap economics. It was not the solitary scar on a poor man's face, that respectable hole in the ground you used to be able to buy after you died for $75 and your wages taxed for 6 months by the Heslop brothers. Brothers, dear God. No, this hole was filled with water, and suddenly I flung myself into the water. All I had on was a jockstrap my brother stole from a miserable football team. Oh, never mind, Jesus Christ, my father and my uncles dug a hole in the ground. No grave for once. It is going to be hard for you to believe. When I rose from that water, a little girl who belonged to somebody else, a face thin and haunted, appeared over my left shoulder and whispered, "Take care now, be patient, and live. I have loved you all this time and didn't even know I am alive." I want to conclude by reading 2 or 3 pieces that are comparatively new. That is, I've been working on them for about 3 years. And a couple of these are prose pieces. I don't have any objection myself really to the term prose poem, except that whenever one uses it, you can be sure that for some reason American critics are going to get into a long nitpicking argument about whether it's prose or whether it's poetry. And in this respect, among others, is a great advantage in being French, because the French can talk about prose poems and not get into nitpicking arguments about them. They know perfectly well that Baudelaire wrote verse. They understand that Flaubert wrote prose. I mean, they were after something else, but no. Nitpicking. This little piece is called Piccolini. Of course, piccolini are tiny fish. And it was written, it's written about the town of Sirmio on Lake Garda in Italy, right near the grotto of Catullus. The great poet Catullus is said to have come out there and into the country and stayed at a villa there, sometimes in the summers. He, if his poems are any indication, and I expect they are, he lived kind of a rough life. He did a lot of dreadful, really dreadful hell-raising in Rome, but then would live quietly out in the country. He means so much to me, and I was so delighted to find that Sirmio was there. First time we ever went to Lake Garda, I was astounded because out comes this long sort of peninsula sticking way up into the huge lake. It's very green. And I had loved that poem that Catullus had written about Sirmio. Paene insularum Sirmio insulorumque ocale. Almost an island, Sirmio, the eye of all islands, and so on. So there I was, finally, at the grotto of Catullus. Piccolini, little fish. Looming and almost molten and slowly moving, its gold downhill just behind my back, is the summer villa of the poet, the Grotte di Catullo. But I care more now for the poetry of the present moment. An easy thousand of silver, almost transparent piccolini are swimming through a very tiny channel at the very rim of the lake. They tickle the skin of my ankles, smaller than Latin diminutives. Catullus, grieving over his Lesbia's sparrow, turned misere from harsh wretched into miselle, poor and little and lovely and gone, all in one word. But those tiny fish that tickle the skin of my ankles are already so diminutive that they would have dissolved altogether into droplets of mist at a mere touch of Catullus's fingertip. I reckon that is why he never wrote of them by name, but left them tiny and happy in their lives in the waters where they still have their lives. and seemed to enjoy the skin of my ankles. This piece is called City of Evenings. It's about Venice. It is still too early for evening, and the smoke of early September is gathering on the waves of the Giudecca Canal outside my room. Steamers, motorboats, trash scows are moving past in large numbers, and gondolas are going home. In a little while, we too will meet the twilight and move through it on a vaporetto toward the Lido, the seaward island with its long beach and its immense hotel, its memories of Aschenbach and his harrowing vision of perfection, of Byron on horseback in the moonlight, and the muted shadows of old Venetians drifting as silently as possible in flight from the barbarians, drifting as far away as the island of Torcello, taking refuge, as Ruskin said, like the Israelites of old, a refuge from the sword in the paths of the sea. Maybe Torcello was nothing much for the princes of the sea to find, but the old Venetians discovered the true shape of evening, and now it is almost evening. I think I'll conclude by reaching all the way back to a Minneapolis episode where I lived for several years. I pronounced a curse on that place when I left it. But I don't know. As Philip Larkin wrote that nothing like something happens anywhere. This poem is called Hook, and it's about one of the late night encounters that I had there. I used to wander around a good deal at night. Hook. I was only a young man in those days. On that evening, the cold was so goddamn bitter, there was nothing. Nothing. I was in trouble with a woman, and there was nothing there but me and dead snow. I stood on the street corner in Minneapolis, lashed this way and that. Wind rose from some pit, hunting me. Another bus to St. Paul would arrive in 3 hours, if I was lucky. Oh, I am plenty lucky. Then the young Sioux loomed beside me. His scars were just my age. Ain't got no bus here a long time, he said. You got enough money to get home on? What did they do to your hand? I answered. He raised up his hook into the terrible starlight and slashed the wind. Oh, that, he said. I had a bad time with a woman. Here, you take this. Did you ever feel a man hold 65 cents in a hook and place it gently in your freezing hand? I took it It wasn't the money I needed, but I took it. Thank you.